Hello everybody and welcome to the Revit Primer, Session 1, uh, Module A, I guess we should call it, out of the 4 modules we're going to be covering today. I'm just going to dive right into this, and the email I sent out should include all of the things we're planning on covering today. So we're going to start up with just an introduction and a project setup. So I'm in Revit 2022. I believe that's what you guys should have. 2023 is not much different, so if you have 2023, don't worry, everything here should apply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to click on a new model, not a new family, and I'm going to pick the Imperial Architecture template, start a project, and wait for that to load. So by default, I have a level 1, a level 2, and a site plan. I have some ceiling plans that are set up. I have some elevations that are set up. And that's about it. There's some families that are preloaded in, which we'll get into that. And there's some groups that are maybe set up in advance, but I actually don't think there's anything. We haven't created any groups yet. There's none in the template. So this is just a subcategory. And this is what your project should look like when you start from scratch. Now, I am going to be using a lot of shortcuts today. I'm going to record the keystrokes and they'll show up on the screen, but unfortunately there are some keystrokes that do not show up. For example, if I want to do a wall, right next to wall here you'll see it says WA in parentheses. That's how Revit has keyboard shortcuts. It doesn't have a command line like AutoCAD or Rhino. Everything is done using these 2-letter keystrokes. So those do not get recorded. I will try to avoid using them as much as possible, but I would actually encourage you to familiarize yourself with a few, mostly in this Modify tab. This is where I tend to use them the most for things like move or copy or rotate. Trim is a big one that I use a lot, TR, mirror, and so on. So if I use one by accident, I apologize, but I would. It's good to get to know them anyway. You can also come into, it's in Manage, and then there's a little arrow here, Additional Settings, and you can go into, actually, I'm sorry, it's in Options here. And then if you go into macros or this is embarrassing. I always forget where this is. It's good to familiarize yourself with these menus anyway. Let me check. Maybe I was right when it is in Manage. Alright, so I've been able to find it after a little bit of searching. It's not in Manage, it's actually in View, User Interface, Keyboard Shortcuts, and in here you can create your own. So I like to create a lot of reference planes, which I'll show you in a second, but reference plane RP, I create one for that. There is not one by default, so all you have to do is find the command you're looking for, and then you can say RP assign. It's already done, so I'm getting an error, or I'm just getting a warning sound, but that's how you can go through and assign them. I would encourage you to start doing that as well as you find commands that you use more and more. Okay, so continuing on, now we've got our menus up here. This functions like a lot of Autodesk programs with the ribbon. What I do want to also highlight is something that I showed briefly before, but if you mouse over something and you actually just keep your mouse on it for a second, you'll get these little quick help things that indicate what the command does. These are very helpful, and it'll tell you how to align the floors with the existing walls or something like that, placing a component, and so on. Sometimes there's actually even little animations that help to show what's going on. Okay, so continuing on, let's start getting this file set up. What we're going to do today is model out the Barcelona Pavilion. and I'm just going to model out pieces of it, but as part of the primer, I want you guys to model out the entire thing by the end of session 1D. So I might just model out 1 or 2 doors. I want you guys to model out every door, and so on. I'm going to show you the basic commands, and then you guys, it's up to you guys to continue using those commands throughout. All right, so we've got our empty file. We want to start just getting things like the site and orientation set up properly. So if I go into massing and site up here, again, these are things that I don't do super frequently, so it might take me just a second. It might be under... Okay, so once again, not under massing and site, but under the Manage tab. These little preliminary setup things I don't do too frequently, so forgive me as I might have to look them up. Once we get into modeling, should be smooth sailing. Location, coordinates, all of that stuff is in here. Acquiring and publishing coordinates, that's important for sharing with other consultants or things like that, but we're not going to worry about that today. So if I click on location, I can actually find Barcelona. Search for that. Oh, and then we have a bunch of different sub options. Let's just pick this one for now. Is that Barcelona, Spain? That does not look like Spain. Let me go to default city list and then come to Barcelona. This will be better. Barcelona, Spain. There we go. Cool. And this will be good for doing things like sun orientation and things like that. It's always good to just kind of set that. Now, the last thing you can do is rotate the true north, which view must be oriented to true north, available only in plan views. Modify the view's properties or use a different view. I actually want to, I'll edit that once we start setting up the different things like the project base point and the survey point, which we'll cover in this session as well. So continuing on, now that I've got sort of a good orientation of the site, I'm going to just set up a basic property line. So even though, you know, I'm not super familiar with the site for the Barcelona Pavilion, but for the sake of just illustrating it, we're going to just make some assumptions. And this is good, obviously, if you have a piece of property and you know all the information about the survey and so on. So we're going to go into site. We're going to go to property line. And you can create it by entering distance and bearings, which if you have a survey that indicates the latitude, longitude, and direction of the property lines, you can just enter them. I'm just going to do create by sketching for now. And let's just say that we are starting... You know what? I'm going to do one thing before I do that. I'm going to turn on the property line. So I'm going to hit VV, which is visibility graphics. This is something you're going to use quite frequently. And if I come down to site here, I'm going to turn on project base point and survey point for now, and internal origin. So I'm going to turn all those on. They're all dead set in the middle of this. We're going to move those in a second, but it's good to kind of get a reference of where they are. You can move them. In general, I like to have the survey point in the corner of the property and the project base point on the corner of the building, and I'll explain what that means once we kind of start getting set up. But we will edit those later. We need the building first before we can start establishing those. So I'm going to start my property line. I'm going to create by sketching, and I'm just going to do a rectangle, and I'm going to start it here, draw it out. I believe the pavilion is 175 feet long, so we'll edit this later if we have to. Again, we're kind of working a little bit backwards here, but let's say 200 feet by 75 feet for now, just to make sure we have all of it captured. You'll notice that the elevations and things are not in the right spot. Nice thing about Revit is we can always move those things, but let's just assume this is where the building is or the property is. I'm going to move these elevation tags to outside my property while I'm here, and you'll see why later that'll help. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is grab my survey point. This is something that's really common in Revit that you're going to get used to using and using it a lot. If I'm mousing over multiple things that are stacked on top of each other and I want to grab something else, you see that down here it says, in the lower left hand corner, if I move my mouse it'll go away. It says project base point. If I hit tab, it'll select the survey point, and if I hit tab, it'll select the project base point. It'll go back and forth. So what I want to do is I actually want to take the survey point, which is there, and I'm going to put this right on the corner. And this is where I can start to indicate things like the north-south or east-west orientation of the project. I'm not going to get too into it today, but in a more complex project where it requires a lot of coordination with the site, that's where you would edit those things. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the project base point, and I'm going to move that down close to the corner so we can start the building kind of close to the edge of the property, but not really quite there. Let's just say we have a little bit of an offset. And let's say we wanted it exactly 4 feet off of each. I can come in here and enter 4 feet. I can come in here and enter 4 feet. I also want the project base point to be set to a height that's higher than the property, and I'll show you why when we get to that. But for now, let's just say 3 feet, and we'll adjust that. So that will then be higher in elevation than that. All right, so now we're in good shape with all of this. The only thing I would say is the project origin is something you may want to keep consistent as well, especially if you're exporting and importing from different platforms. As long as that remains consistent between platforms, it doesn't really matter where that is. It's usually good to have that in a location that makes some sense. So just for the sake of cleaning this up, I'm going to grab everything because everything is now accurate relative to each other. I'm going to click on move, and I'm going to drag this to there. All right, so now our building is oriented properly. It seems like a very convoluted, long process, but I can tell you that spending a little bit of time doing this right the first time will save minutes, if not hours, down the road. So we've got our building location set up. We've got our site set up. The next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to start managing my levels, and I'm going to start getting some CADs in there, which then help us with the topography and the floor plan and all of that. We'll get the site set up, ready to go, and then in the next video, we'll start actually modeling out floors, walls, doors, all of that good stuff. Okay, so now that the site is somewhat set up properly, I'm going to go to an elevation. So let's go to the east elevation, or maybe the south. I am not going to use east, north, south here. So what I'm going to do is east, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Let's call east, we'll call that the west, or sorry, we will call this the right side. So let's call this right. North, we will call rear. South, we will call front. And west we will call left. Now, what I also often like to do in projects is just call it front, south maybe, right? So you can understand both, but we don't need to worry about that, so I'll just undo that. And the final thing is I want to set up my levels a little bit more accurately, and my ground here at level 1, this is going to be my ground plane. Or you know what, I'm actually going to keep that as is, and I'm going to create a new level just because I am a stickler. I'm going to call this level 1. It's going to ask me if I want to rename my corresponding views. I'm going to say yes, and it will actually rename the view over here. And I'm going to come here, click on that, call that level 2, all caps, yes. Now I want to create a new level for the ground. This will be the base of the pavilion. So I'm going to go into architecture and then level, and I'm going to come here and I'm going to click and drag this. It's 9 feet below that. That is too deep. I think it's about 3 we'll start with. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to just actually, there's a few ways I can change the dimension between them, but I can come here and say actually 3 feet, and it'll move up. Or I can click move and move it up 3 feet. Revit's really good with these little dimension handles that pop up that allow you to set relative dimensions to other things in the project. Final thing I'm going to do here is rename this. Let's call this ground. And then we're good there. Now, these are reporting strangely. I don't want this to say -3. I want that to say 0. So first I'm going to check to see where it's reporting from, the project base point. And then what I'm going to do is in this view, I'm going to actually go to something quick. I don't want to see my survey points and my project base points and all that stuff in my elevation all the time. So I'm going to do a little trick called enable temporary view properties, which is this. So I'm going to click here, enable temporary view properties, and then if I hit VV again, which is my visibility graphics, I'm going to come down to site, expand that, turn these things on, click OK. So there they are relative to the project. My project base point is up here, and my survey point is here. So this, I want to move down to here, and I can actually do align AL, which is a really, really powerful tool. And I'm going to click here, then I'm going to click on that, and it will align that point exactly to there. I can do the same thing with my project base point. Align, there, there. And if you look, now my level is reporting from there. So if I remove my project base point, if I was just to come over here and grab it and pull it up, these will all report differently. So I want that to be there. That's good. All this stuff is good. My levels are reporting properly. We'll set these heights more accurately once we get the CAD underlays in, but this will get us going for the levels. I should have prefaced by saying this, that setting up your levels is very, very important. Now, when you're doing really large design projects, you may not know how many levels you're going to have at first, so you might not really be able to do this, but getting as close as possible is good, and also getting the floor-to-floor heights pretty close is good. What you'll see is if you start to reorganize levels, add levels in between, and so on, it'll be complicated. It'll be hard to make those edits down the road. So you want to try to establish these levels as accurately as possible at the very, very beginning of the project. The other thing is the floor-to-floor heights. We will, like I said, we'll check those, but we want to try to get those somewhat accurate. I think it's about 12 feet to the top of the roof. And that reminds me, I'm actually going to rename this top of the roof because there is no level 2 in the Barcelona Pavilion. And so I think we're in pretty good shape with our levels. Now, the one thing you might notice is that the origin point is kind of in the middle here. It's because I shifted the whole entire building and these are in a weird spot now relative to it. I can click and drag this little dot, which will move them all relative to each other. They just have to be constrained, right? If I unlock that, I can move this. Oops, that's not actually it. I'll unlock that, and then I can drag this one independent, and then it won't be constrained to there anymore. But I actually want to try to keep that relationship, so it helps me keep the levels nice and clean. Same thing on that side. Again, it's something we'll clean up as we go. All right, so now that we've got our levels set up, and we've got our site somewhat set up, the next thing I want to do is talk about CAD imports. Okay, so for CAD imports, I'm going to go to the level that I want to put the CAD on. So let's start with level 1. And I'm going to do what's called insert. There's lots of things you can insert in here, and we'll cover a few of these today, and throughout all these modules we'll talk about different things. Linking is a very smart thing to do. Number one, because if the file updates on the back end, it'll update here. And number two, if it does not load the file with a bunch of line types and things like that, the files can get really messy if you do import CAD, which is here, rather than link CAD. So for now, we're going to really stick with linking. I have set up for everybody in Dropbox. Let me pull this up real quickly. And I will send the link in the email to this as well. In the Revit primer folder, there's this Barcelona CADs. So you're going to want to come in here and make sure you download all of these CAD files. The all has all the buildings in it. The other one have, sorry, not all the buildings, all the drawings. These have them all broken out by level, right, and the elevation. Now, what I've also done is orient them relative to the origin point, which is very, very important. So I took this all and I broke it up, and I made sure the origin point was consistent throughout. As you'll see it when we start putting this in, that'll become critical for making sure the building is coordinated properly. It's also very, very important if you're sharing data back and forth between Rhino and Revit. You always want to make sure that that is good. And the reason is, number one, accuracy. And number two, it's just going to make your life a whole lot easier. Rather than trying to guess where things are supposed to go, they're just going to be in the right place. So what I can do, since I have those on my computer already, is I'm going to go to Link CAD. And I'm going to go to that file. Oops, public. Revit primer. CAD. And then I'm going to go to Barcelona. Let's start with, we're on level 1. So the file that we want to place, we want to make sure we go to that level first. So I'm going to click level, right? And one thing, I'm going to not click current view only because I'm going to show you why in a second. I'm going to come back and redo it and do that, but I just want to show you why. Colors, we'll say preserve. You can have it come black and white, but I want to just be able to see the different layers in that CAD visualization style. It's going to ask me where I want to put it, or I'm sorry, what layers from the file do I want to be able to see. I want all of them. Import units auto detect. It's pretty good. It actually can try to detect what units are coming in. If this is not coming in right, you can come edit this, but it's usually good. This just helps clean up the file, which is nice. Auto origin to origin, as I was talking about, this is what we want to do to make sure that everything always lines up in the right place. Oops, sorry, not center to center, origin to origin. And then place at level 1. So it's going to place it here. It's going to orient it to the view. I'm going to click open, and there it is. So I had my width a little bit off. So, again, let's just pretend like we can edit property lines here. So I'll just edit that slightly, make this 90 feet. All right, cool. So there it is. Now I have this in here. It's all set. It's in place. And it's a linked file. So I can't select any of the little lines. I can only select the whole thing like a block. I'm going to click and try to drag this. I can't because it's pinned. So if I unpin it, I can drag it, but I don't want to do that. I want this to remain pinned so somebody can't accidentally move it. That's something very powerful. I can click on like lots of different things and pin them. I think I can click on, like if I click on this property line, there's a pin up here. I can pin it. Now it can't be edited or dragged. If I click on this elevation tag, I could come up here and pin it. So that's up in this modify tab. But very, very helpful. You don't want somebody accidentally dragging your references. So the pin is incredibly helpful. Okay, so now that this is set, I want to show you why I don't want to, I want to go back and do this again and check that one box. If I go to the 3D view, I can actually see the CAD relative to 3D. You may want that. I prefer not to have that because I like to be able to only see it view by view, and I don't want a bunch of CADs cluttering up my 3D. So I'm actually going to go back to level 1 here, and I'm going to just hit Control Z until it undoes that insert. And let's do it again real quick. Link CAD, same exact thing, except I'm going to do current view only. And then everything else should be the same. I'll click OK. Let's go in and edit this property line, 90 feet. This one, I think we made it 190. Okay. All right, so that's good. And it's pinned, but if I go to my 3D view, which up here, this little house, it doesn't show up here. So it helps me keep the file cleaner by not doing that. And again, sometimes you might want to see the CAD in 3D, sometimes you don't. In this circumstance, I don't want to, and I usually prefer doing it that way. All right, great. So now what we can do is go through and get all of these oriented properly. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go to Link CAD, top of roof. I have my roof drawing here. Everything else will remain the same. Click OK. There it is. And it's pinned. And I'm going to start doing some modeling here to get some sense of reference before I start bringing the elevations in. Well, actually, you know what? Let's bring in the front first, just one, which will help us with our levels, and then the other ones we can check against the model. So I'm going to link CAD again. I'm going to pick front, and I've got this set pretty accurately in terms of location. So all of my, as I mentioned, all of my stuff is off in terms of levels because I shifted the whole thing over, and we'll clean that up. I'm going to introduce you to reference planes right now, which is something super powerful. Or you know what? Let's start with grid lines. So let's go back here, and if you were starting a project from scratch, you would create your own grid lines, or you would work with a structural engineer to determine what those grid lines are. For our purposes, we're going to just use the existing model and create some theoretical grid lines. So I'm going to come to architecture, and I'm going to click on grid. And let's just orient it to the outside of this wall, it's usually on the center of the wall, but for our purposes, this is good. So I'm going to click one there. And then the nice thing about Revit again is you can actually then start to copy this, and it will say 2. Let's put 1. Let's go to the roof plan, and you can see actually you can see that these carry through from view to view, which is nice. I can actually pull this down to, let me go back to level 1. I'll copy this over to, let's say, the edge of this wall. We're kind of just making these up, but so it's not exactly on there. I'm going to hit AL, align to there and there, copy, and put one maybe on here. And then finally, let's put one at the end. Align, there, cool. Sorry, I keep doing what I said I wasn't going to do, which is use 2-letter shortcuts, but AL is something that I use pretty frequently, and it'll be hard for me to break that habit. It's actually in modify. I don't even know where it is because I just do the shortcut all the time. It's here, align. And then you see there's like a little video that pops up that shows you how to use it. All right, so what I'll do is I'll put them the other way now. So I'm going to go back to architecture, grids. Let's have one here, and I'll just draw it this way. I want it to obviously, oops, I want it to come down to here. Now what I'm going to do is call this A rather than 6. And again, Revit is smart enough that I will start to copy this up, and it will know that they should be A, B, C, D, E rather than 1, 2, 3. So once I rename that first one A, the rest will follow suit. And that's also with sheets and things like that. If you create one and call it A101, it's smart enough to create the next one as A102 and so on. All right, so we've got our grids. Let's go back to our front elevation here. So yeah, so this is in the right place because you can see my grids are lining up with the building quite nicely, but just these levels are out of whack. And again, that's because I sort of shifted the whole thing. So throughout the course, it's just kind of best practice is you can go through and clean all this stuff up at once. What I'm going to do is just clean them up as I go from view to view. But the grid lines will help us understand whether or not things are in the right place. Now, I got my top of roof pretty close to where the CAD is. You can see this faint gray line there. So I'm going to align to there, make sure I get my roof very accurate. And this is in metric, so my imperial units are not going to line up. And then for the ground, let's actually set this to be at the bottom of the stairs. So we will consider that kind of our grade level because the grade changes. So let's do that. So I'm going to just align to the bottom of this. And this is another little trick is if I hit a line, I don't want to align to that because that's angled. If I hit tab, I don't want to align to that because I need something that's parallel to the plane I'm trying to align. So I'm just going to hit that, click on that point, and then that will come down. And now there's my ground, which is -410 below level 1. All right, so we've got this set up. Let's get the left elevation in. And I'm going to come here, and because we've got our grids and our levels, this should be relatively painless. Insert, link CAD, elevation left. Okay, good stuff. Rear, link CAD, elevation rear. Cool. In the right place, because again, I set all my origin points properly. And then if we come to right, oh, I still have temporary view properties on the right. I didn't show you how to turn this off. Revit maintains that until I shut it off in the view. So as long as the view is still open here, that will be consistent. I'm going to click here and go to Restore View Properties, and then it's going to turn off those temporary overrides that I put on. That is a really good way of turning things on and off. As you get deeper and deeper into Revit, and as we get deeper and deeper into these tutorials, you're going to realize that the last thing we want to do is mess with the visibility of things because it's just going to make life very difficult. You want to be very, very diligent about your visibility. Now, if you want to turn things on and off to help with referencing and things like that, you can use that visibility graphic override, but you really want to avoid messing with templates if you can't see something or if you need to turn something on temporarily. Okay, so let's get this in here. We'll link the CAD, right, okay, and that's in the right place, and again, it's pinned by default, which is nice. So we've got all of our CADs in, and we've got all of our grid lines set up, and luckily the CAD file of that I downloaded was pretty accurate. One thing is that in this elevation, it looks like the stair is not in the same place as it is in the other one. I'm going to come in and actually just align my stair to there. Let's just use this elevation as a stair since it looks like that surface is pretty flat there. Okay, so then the next thing I want to show you quickly is something called a reference plane. Reference planes are good for indicating things in multiple different views that you may not want to print, right? So grids and levels and things like that are going to print. Reference planes don't print. but they act sort of like grids and levels in that you can see them in every view and allow you to kind of reference things against each other. So my favorite shortcut, like I said earlier, is RP for reference plane. That's what it looks like. To show you where it is, if I click on architecture ref plane, there it is. This front surface of the building does not have a grid associated with it, but that's kind of an important datum. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a reference plane there, maybe extend it down a little bit so it shows up in a bunch of different views. I can pin it so no one can move it, and I can also name it, which is helpful. So I can call this face of pedestal, or let's call it podium. Face of podium, right? If we want to get even more specific, let's call it front face of podium. Now that always has its name associated with it. There it is. If I go to level 1, I can actually see that front face of podium. It's now visible in all these different views. If I go to the left elevation, there it is. So that's very helpful in being able to determine the location of different things that, again, you may not want to print. You don't want too many grid lines. You don't want too many levels. It's going to become really difficult to manage later. I cannot emphasize how important it is to minimize the amount of levels you need, because once you start drawing things in plan and section, it'll start constraining to different levels. And if you have unused levels, you're going to be in for a lot of troubles when things start locking to the wrong place and you're not able to kind of go back and understand where they are. And if you delete a level, everything that's on that level gets deleted and it becomes a mess. Okay, so now that we've got the reference plane set up, we'll be using those pretty frequently. A quick little trick, just to show you in 3D. I'm not seeing anything because everything is hidden in 3D so far. I have a lot of views open here. The model is not very heavy yet because there's empty, but once the model gets pretty heavy, having a lot of views open can slow it down. So you only want to have the views on that you're working in, because it's going to update these views as we go. But what Revit normally does, so if I click on right now, it opens pretty quickly. If I close out right, we'll save it in a second. And I click right, you see it thinks for a second and then it shows it. If the model's very heavy or large, it's going to think for longer, but it's actually redrawing those levels every time. It's redrawing those views every time you open them. So if it's open here, it's not redrawing, but if updates are occurring, it's got to trickle that update through every open view. Whereas if they're closed, it's not worrying about figuring out where all that stuff is in every view. It only does that when you then go open it again. All right, so all that is a long way of me saying if you come up here and click close inactive views, it'll close everything except the view you have open. It's good to periodically do that to sort of close everything, especially once you might end up with 20 windows open at a time once you're really deep into a project. And if you don't want to go through and click them all, you can just do that to get rid of them all. Okay, we got reference planes. Let's finish up with topography and building pads, and then our site will really be ready. So topography is going to be a little tricky here because we don't have a survey, but what we do have in the elevations is an indication of where the surface sits relative to the building. So if I go to the right, I can see my grade back to here is all at the same height. So that's actually a good place to put a reference plane. Let's draw a reference plane there so we know where that is. And we'll call this extent of grade of graded surface, because that is graded back flat. And then, you know what? Like I've said, I'm going to come and clean this up just to make it a little bit more legible. Okay, so back here, I have this, which is a little bit lower than there. So I'm going to start recording a couple key topography points, for the purposes of just doing this. Again, if we had a survey, it would be a lot easier. But for this, we need this data in order to go forward. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, but I'm going to come in and measure these and record these to understand where they are relative to the level 0, 0. And I'll show you why that's important once we do that. So I'll be right back with that information. Okay, so what I've done is I've created a spreadsheet here which tells me on the right elevation and the left elevation what is the height of the grade or the elevation of the grade at each one of these grid lines and these reference planes that I've created, and then the front and the rear. I've actually put this in that public folder for you guys as well, so you don't have to create this yourself, but for your reference, if you go into Revit Primer, Excel, you have this Barcelona grade values Excel file. So what does that mean? That means is we can now start to create an accurate topography around this, and this has a pretty significant grade, so it'll be quite interesting to see where it ends up. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the site. Let me see what happens. Actually, no. Let's go to level 1, because here we have these new reference planes that I created, like rear datum 1, extent of front grade 2, extent of graded surface, etc. And those are labeled in my spreadsheet. So this is going to be a little bit tedious, but let's work through it together. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting in a topo surface. One thing I want to do actually is I want to make sure that this elevation here, see how this says elevation 0? I want to make sure that we're reporting relative to that. Let me see if I adjust this to elevation 0. What is this? No, that's not what I want. We may need to do a little bit of math here before we continue, because now I'm realizing that these are relative to the, let's try it out and see what happens. We might need to make some adjustments and troubleshoot a bit. So for A on the right hand side, that's here, elevation A, I know that this is 4'3" and 3/4. Sorry, 4'4" and 3/4 negative. So let me show you how to do that. A, grid line A. Okay. I'm going to go to Site, Topo Surface. It says topographic elements are not visible in current view. Like I said, I'm going to turn on Enable Temporary View Properties because I want to be able to see that topography. Go to VV, Visibility Graphics, Site. I think it's under Site, or it might be under Topography. Yeah, it's under Topography. So I'll turn that on. Make sure all that is on. Click OK. Now I should be able to see it. And I'm going to place a point, and it's going to ask me what the elevation is. And I'm going to say I want this to be -4 foot 4 3/4. Sorry, -4 foot 4 space 3/4 inch. And I'm going to place it at the intersection of the right elevation and grid line A. And I know the grade comes across there, so I'm going to do that. And I'm actually going to do a little bit of troubleshooting here because I'm not seeing it at all. The problem is my view range is probably too not deep enough. This is something that you'll encounter a lot. I'm going to show you how to fix that right now. I'm going to click Edit, View Range. For now, my view depth, I'm just going to say Unlimited and hit Apply. And actually, I can now see all the way down. Anything below the view, I'll see. So now I can see that little topo surface that I started to create. And obviously, that's not quite right, but I'm going to click here and click on Edit Surface. And now I can start to edit these points, right? So if I click on this, I have a point at that height, and then I can start to place those where those are supposed to go. So I know that there's actually one of these. If I copy this here, I know there's one. And then we're going to start doing, like I said, it's a little bit tedious, but we're going to start getting these in the right places. So for grid line B, I'm not going to keep pulling the spreadsheet down. You guys can look at it, but just to show you, for grid line B, I'm at -3 foot 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do place point, -3 foot 11, and I'm going to place it at grid line B, which is right here. And then the next one at grid line C is -1 foot 1.5 inches, and that goes at grid line C. Then I have a point at rear grade. This is important because this is where it sort of starts to flatten out. This luckily is -8 inches, and that, and that are all the same place. Now, because I don't have the topography at the edge of this, for the purposes of keeping life easy, I'm just going to carry these over. So there, there, and there. And then I'm actually just going to copy this over here. So that should be at that height, this, copy this over. And I'll show you why in a second. This, I'm going to copy this over. And so once that's done, I'm going to click on Modify Edit Surface, click the check mark, and now if I look at this, I have a surface that's actually going angled up. It follows the surface of the topography on the side of the building, and I can even check that right elevation to see. And actually, that's the surface that I just clicked on. This is the topo surface here. And it's pretty close to what the line of the side of the building is. Now, if we wanted to get really precise, we should probably add a little point here for where that comes. So I can double click on this, edit surface. It's going to actually allow me to kind of do stuff here, but that's not the best place to do it. So I'm going to click here. These 2 points, I can copy these back to here. And now if I click OK, and I go back to my right elevation, it comes back nicely to there. So there's the beginning of my topo surface. I'm going to finish this up. I'm going to try to do this quickly. I'm going to keep the recording going so you guys can see what I'm doing. But I'm going to go back to the level 1. And let's just do the other side just so you can kind of see how this would work when I'm extending out. So if I go to the left-hand side, again, looking at my spreadsheet here, I have all the values here. At A, on the left-hand side, my height is 2 foot 9.5. So I'm going to click on my topography, edit surface. That's okay for now. That's a clipping plane issue that we can resolve. But if I come here, I know that this point here, if I do place point, this is grid line A on the left-hand side. This is 2 foot 9, -2 foot 9. You can do 9.5 that way, I think. Let's try it. It makes life a little easier. Yeah, you can just do 9.5. And I'm going to put one here, here, and there. And you can see this is filling in. It's completing the surface based on the points. And then the front grading, which is, let's check our front grading is here. That's 2 foot 9.5 as well. So I'm going to copy this, bring this back there and there. Oops. You don't have to do it right to the edge of the property line, but just for the sakes of keeping things, again, clean, I'm going to do that. It could extend past the property line if you need to. And then for grid line B, we're at negative 11.5. So I'm going to do place point, negative 11.5 inches. And I'm going to put one there and there. For C, on the left-hand side, this is actually 1 foot 8 because this pitches up a lot to the back there. So I'm going to come here and say 1 foot 8 inches. Put one there and there. You can actually start to see the topo lines being cut in the surface because of the steep grade, and you can edit like the visibility at which those topo lines occur, which we'll do in a second. Then I'm at D on the left-hand side, which is 2 foot 5. So I'm going to do 2 foot 5 inches. There and there. And then E is actually 4 foot 2 inches. So let's do 4 foot 2 inches. Cool. And I'm going to bring that back to here and here. And it's getting clipped at that height because it's such a change that we're not seeing that, but that's okay. Let me go back to my 3D view so you can see this. So now this is like a pretty significant change. And the topos are being cut. Now the front and the back are not accurate yet, so let's do those quickly. I'm going to again click on this, edit the surface, and along the front, I know that at grid line 2, I'm at 3 foot 10. So I'm going to, negative 3 foot 10. So let's go negative 3 foot 10 inches, which is grid line 2. I'm sorry, it's negative 3 foot 3 inches. So I'm going to go there and there. Then at grid line 3, it's negative 4 foot 2, so negative 4 foot 2. There, there. And at grid line 4, it's negative 4 foot 9. And then those are done already. So let's do the back, the rear. At grid line 1, it's actually 4 foot 1, not negative 4 foot 1 inch. Which actually, I'm sorry, we have that already. And then it's actually negative 4 all across the back here because it slopes down pretty dramatically. So I'm going to my negative 4 there, 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 and then this is where that stops, and then those we have already. So actually you see when I put those in, it kind of like really drastically altered it. But it gives us a good accurate topo of where the building sits. And the one thing that I do want to make sure of is relative to the ground, it seems to be in the right place, which is great. And all of our elevations were looking good. So here we are. We've got a nice topography that's ready to build on. So we have to set up a place to build. And what we're going to do for that is a building pad, and then that'll be the end of this video. So I'm going to go to a level 1, and I'm going to create a building pad, which means that I'm going to go to Massing and Site, Building Pad, and I'm just going to start with a pad 1. I'm going to put it on the ground level, and since temporary view properties are on, I'm going to come down here and go to wireframe because my topography is currently hiding my building outline and I want to be able to see that. And I'm just going to do my building pad and I'm going to draw it using lines. We're in what's called sketch mode now, like we did for the property line. And I'm going to click from there to there. to there to here. Wait, actually where? Oh yeah, sorry, to here. Then it steps in. I'm going to escape out and then just bring that down to clean that up. And then I can come back into here. Going to trace this out. Down to here, then around to the stair. There. And then back to here. Just make sure I get accurate to the CAD. And then I'm done. So now that that's done, I'm going to click this. So I'm going to turn off this view properties for a second. And you can see, I can see the CAD now and the topo's gone. But if I go to a 3D view, I actually have this building cut out. That is the height of where the project's going to sit. And it comes up where it's above the topography and it goes down where it's below. So it's nice because it creates this perfect footprint of exactly where the building's going to go. And again, we can adjust this. We can have different heights for this, but this is a way to get this established. So now we have a good solid base plane to start putting our building on. We'll come back with the next video.